Prologue, The Last Log. The man with one red eye and one blue turned on the computer in his room, just as his major had told him to. He looked up a site that was simply called The Lie. There were a great many logs, and it started at the bottom. The site was very popular, having a great many views, but no one had subscribed with their profiles. They all must have known by heart when something would be posted. According to the site, there were 7 profiles listed on a sidebar of users, along with their pictures. They went in order of who had posted the longest ago. Olivia Weston was at the top of that list, but there was no profile. The man could hardly believe it. She was a very small young girl with orange hair and blue eyes. She was standing in a photo with the several other people on the user list. He had known Olivia a long time ago, but underneath that photo was a caption that almost cracked his heart to pieces. In memory of Olivia and all the others involved in the lie. Olivia was the last of several child murders in which they lost something. All of the victims' hearts were cut from their chest. He almost stopped reading right there. Children being murdered? What section was there that would allow such things to happen? Several murders. There had never been several murders in any of the sections before. He continued all the same, wishing to know more information about his mission before he left. Kachia Hall was the first real profile. She had tan skin and short, bright blue hair and eyes. Her eyes were sharp and lively, as if she had been watching the photographer intently. He clicked on her personal information, and he discovered she was a martial artist. Saren Wesley was the next on the list. He had white blonde hair that he held back in a small ponytail. He had one icy blue eye and one brown. He was a very skilled violin prodigy, and had done many performances. It seemed, though, he had lost his sight in his brown eye. Chai Ro had light brown hair and hazel eyes. He was wearing a high school uniform, which suggested he was in high school, but he was only 11. It said he was a young genius and a skilled pianist. He was an orphan, but had been adopted by a school teacher. There were 2 adult profiles on the list as well. Aya Izumi. She had short, almost boyish black hair and dark green eyes. She moved to America's sections from Japan with her younger sister and her brother-in-law. She owned the park in section 005. Aspen Rowe was a high school professor. He looked a lot like the small child the man had earlier seen. It said he was his adoptive father. He had neatly combed brown hair and dark chocolate-colored eyes. The last 2 profiles were the one that caught the man's attention, as they were the last to make entries into the site. Kyle Nimhe was a man he did, but did not know. When he opened his files, only corrupted ones appeared. Nothing but his name and photo was provided to him. He had black, messy hair, but it was his eyes that disturbed him the most. He had these golden, apathetic eyes that seemed to slowly and deeply gnaw into one's very soul. But it was the last profile that hit him in the heart the hardest, as he had known her well. Yuka Izumi was the last profile. Hers were so very corrupted. He knew that data had been erased, and new data had been put in many times, but he knew her well enough to know that this recent corruption had to have been made on her own. Sighing, he scrolled to the top of the page and clicked on Kyle's video file that had been taken but an hour ago. Someone pried the cap off of a camera. It was Kyle. He looked tired and had deep circles under his eyes. He looked very worried. You could say he was a very different man from the one in the photo taken at the beginning of that year. Soft beeps sounded in the background, but it was too dark to see anything but his face, as if all the light had been but erased. "Is she all right to travel, Aspen? Are you absolutely sure she won't get worse?" he said. The camera shook a little as someone trudged over. "She's at the 3rd stage. You know that there are 6, and the 3rd is the longest. She'll be this way for a while." He heard a gentle voice trying to wake someone. Kyle turned quickly and went to the bedside. A flashlight was clicked on, and the man could finally see where they were. The Section 005 hospital placed in subsection B. The stark white walls with black, neatly painted words gave it away, but they didn't seem to care anymore. Why did they have to? They had already abandoned everything keeping track of them. Yuka Izumi sat on the bed. The room was small, and the windows barred. A closed laptop sat beside her as well as 2 children. Saren Wesley and Kachia Hall sat by her side as Kyle came over. She was pale and thin, and looked very sick. She was always a sickly person. "But what's happening?" the man said aloud. Kyle helped her sit up as she began to choke and cough. When Kachia gave her a bucket, Yuka turned absolutely white and coughed up a red liquid. Yuka was coughing up blood. The man could scarcely watch. He stifled a scream as he saw the blood. He had known her too well, had been close to her. It was so painful to watch, despite the policy to be apathetic. He was human. He would always feel the burden of emotion. Yuka stopped coughing and moved her mouth, but there was no sound, save for a raspy breath that she painfully sucked in. She smiled sadly at Kachia. Kachia laid her head on her lap and cried silently. When she lifted her head, you could see her tears gleam like small pearls. Could she not speak, he thought? A tall man entered the room and lifted Yuka off the bed. She gasped in pain for a second, but calmed as she looked him in the eyes. She made hand motions, as if trying to tell him something. The man knew that Yuka had learned sign language and paid close attention to her hand signals. She moved her hands in a slurred fashion, and it was hard to translate, but he figured it out and wrote it down on paper. "I'm going to die sooner, aren't I?" When the man learned of what she was saying, he clicked the pause button and typed in a search in another tab. It didn't matter if he was being monitored. They would think he was finding out more about his mission. He typed in the symptoms that had been described in the video. 6 stages, coughing up blood, weakness, loss of speech. But what came up is very disturbing. Nothing but a single link came up, and it was only available to someone of his status and above. He found that he couldn't muster the courage to click upon the link. He was scared. He couldn't shake it off. He exited out of the tab and went back to the video. Yuka was still holding her hand up for the last word. He quickly clicked on the button, so it wouldn't linger in his head. "What is she saying, Aspen?" Kyle said, having watched them. Saren looked horrified, and Kachia stared at Saren in a questioning manner. He shook his head and regained his composure. Aspen, on the other hand, had never lost it, and was completely calm as he nodded at Yuka. "She says that we should hurry. We have to get out of here before the patrol cars get here. We wouldn't want to meet up with the police right now." Kyle looked at the ground and nodded. Something in his pocket gleamed in the light of the flashlight. The man wondered what it was, but he just left it as something he would discover later. They all began to move, and feet behind the camera could finally be heard. There were more people than he had once thought. Kyle walked up to the camera and knelt before it. "Rebel against those you call your protectors," were his last, simple words as he knocked over the camera. The fragile glass cracked, but you could still see as Kyle brought down his foot on it. The end of the video brought him to the last log in the site, made by Yuka just a few moments afterwards. Tonight is a new beginning. Kyle turned off the monitor and sighed, not understanding until he leaned back in his chair. Above his head in the dark, dark window, he saw that the moon was gone. A new moon that he had not noticed in the video. Tonight was indeed a new beginning, but his own was a somewhat bittersweet one. Having had this revelation, he sat back up and turned his monitor on. It's much too late for me to change, of course, but this can still be a beginning in which I will adapt. He scrolled back down to the bottom, where the first log was. It simply said, "They told me to write it down."